Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Thanks for joining us for episode 276. We have a returning guest this week, Mr. Ethan Banks. Ethan is a network engineer, a podcaster and content creator, and the founder of the Packet Pushers Podcast Network. We visited with Ethan back in episodes 42 and 43, and we wanted to check in on what he's been up to since that time. If I were to tell you that everything needs lifecycle management, you would probably think I was speaking of some piece of technology. When you think about a hardware device that you bring into your environment, there's the date you bring it in, you operate it for a while, and then eventually you're going to get rid of it. It has a life cycle with a beginning and an end. We're going to have a really good discussion with Ethan about how the idea of life cycle can apply to all sorts of personal and professional projects in our lives. Maybe you're someone listening to this and you're down on your luck because you need a job and you need to put some points on the board. We're going to talk about a really cool project that was launched in early 2024 by the Packet Pushers, the Packet Pushers Job Board. Ethan will tell you what it is, how it came to be, and how you can take advantage of it. Let's get to part one of our discussion with Ethan Banks.
Ethan Banks, welcome back to the Nerd Journey Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me back. We were talking before the show that it's been 5 years. I can't believe it's been that long, but thanks for having me back.
That's right. Back in the day, it was episodes 42 and 43.
Okay.
And here we are past the 200s now.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
It seems kind of crazy, but there it is.
Yeah, you guys are persistent. We would say too stupid to quit, and you guys are also too stupid to quit. It's like we on the Packet Pusher side just haven't given up. Keep going with the podcasts.
You did tell us that if we hit 100 episodes that we were past, I don't know, in the top 1% or something like that, I think at the time.
A lot of podcasts get started. Very few persist past 100 episodes. Yeah. So, yeah, well done.
There was some struggle getting to 20. So,
yeah, for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of Packet Pushers in the last few years? I'm going to cop to the fact that I have a 2-year-old, so for the last 2 years, my podcast time has been pretty sparse.
You want to know from like a business perspective how talk about it like that?
Sure. Maybe we can talk about the effect of the pandemic. Maybe we could back up to that point.
So let me back up a second. Our business model at Packet Pushers is sponsorships. That is, we have these podcasts for technical people, for engineers, and the way we make money doing that so that we can devote our full time and attention to it is sponsors come on, typically vendors who have something that they want to talk about on one of our shows. When the pandemic hit, live events, which is one of the places that vendors typically spend money. They go to places like Cisco Live and VMworld Explore and so on. Those live events weren't happening anymore. So here they are needing to do marketing and nowhere to market because of live events being gone, or at least one of their major channels being removed. And so from a business perspective for us, that meant, can we get on Packet Pushers and start talking there? Because there's no live events to do it. So let's go to the Packet Pushers team. And that we became one of the outlets that were used for marketing. So we had sponsorships coming in left and right for about a 2-year period. I'm losing track of the timelines exactly, but I think 2020 and 2021, we got pretty heavily booked. on a lot of our shows with different vendors that wanted to come on and sponsor an entire show, or people that wanted to run ads, as the case may be. And so business was very busy. We were picking up some of the money that would have gone into live events otherwise. As the pandemic faded out, then the pattern has shifted back to normal, where we're just one of many different channels that a potential sponsor might use. And so now it's been like, okay, we got caught up on all the backlog because we got booked way ahead of time for certain things. We got all caught up on that backlog, and now it's like back to a normal thing. We went through a 2.5-year period of just absolute insanity trying to keep up with demand. One of the things that we did as a result of that is we realized, wow, we don't have enough inventory on the network, because the podcasting business is limited inventory. You produce, let's say for a particular series, one show a week, right? You can't just make more podcasts. People don't have that much attention where you can just like, wow, we'll publish 3 podcasts a week. People aren't listening to 3 podcasts a week. They don't have that much time. So if it's a one show a week, it's one show a week. You've only got so much inventory available. And we realized as we were starting to book first weeks and then months and then several months out, almost a year out for certain of our shows, that we just need to create more shows. So we began working on that, adding more shows to the network so that we would have more opportunities for people that wanted to sponsor Packet Pushers, people that wanted to work with us, different shows that they could be on. And that's really what's been happening the last few years since the pandemic, is we've been trying to grow by adding more shows to the network. So that there's availability for sponsors that want to work with us.
Let me ask this, Ethan. When you have this flood of demand for your service, right? You had a flood of sponsors that wanted to work with you. Did it change the vetting process that you might go through with sponsors because of the demand spike? I can see like wanting to have all the business, right? Because you're getting this huge spike. But you also want to make sure it's the right type of sponsor that fits your style of show, the audience that you're reaching. So did that have to be adjusted at all because of the volume?
Nope. The vetting process is the vetting process, and that's been pretty standard since the beginning. The way we work with sponsors is twofold. One, is this something our audience is going to care about because it's something that a technology they work with, something that they might be buying for their companies, or something that they might be interested in, even if they've never heard of it before. That's number one. Would the audience care about whatever this thing is? We don't sell mattresses. We don't sell Squarespace. We're not doing that kind of stuff. It's always, enterprise tech, service provider tech, cloud provider tech, infrastructure. Those sorts of things are the products that we know our audience cares about, and that's what they're talking about all the time. So the vetting process is, who are you, company? Have we heard of you before or not? If not, okay, let's get a briefing and figure out who you are, what you're selling, and who your target audience is, who your target market is. Who are you trying to sell to? Can we help you with that? Yes or no? So, for example, we've had some vendors come to us who are selling tools for developers. Well, we're not really a developer-oriented show. We know about development. We maybe even do some development in the world of automation and stuff like that. But is that what our primary audience focus is? No, not really. Developers are developers. They have a specific world. They are doing specific things. And so when someone comes to us pitching a developer tool, could you put it on the network? It's kind of like, guys, you're not gonna do well with us. That's not really what our audience is tuned into. And so you're a great company, great product, not really a fit for us. That you'd be wasting your money. So the vetting process didn't change. And in fact, it got easier, if you will, in the sense that there was so much demand. It's not like we were struggling to fund the business, or we needed additional cash and we were just struggling. And so it was like, oh, we don't want to turn them away, but we have to. We never even had those conversations. We had so many companies that we were very familiar with and very comfortable working with that it was even easier, if anything.
How did you decide which shows to develop? Because I feel like maybe that is the next logical question. Mm-hmm. You're talking about shows as inventory, right? Episodes as inventory.
Yep.
And you've had, historical shows, that have been running for hundreds of episodes. Mm-hmm. And then at the same time, logically, if you have like a everything networking show, right? How do you decide to chop that up to, what about, let's have like a wireless show, or an IPv6 show, or a network automation show, like kind of picking a much more focused channel. And is there any concern about dilution?
Of course, there's concern about dilution, if you will. That is, Like you, all the shows you mentioned, I mean, you're drawing from our show lineup. It sounds like you know exactly the shows that we have. So, I mean, we have Heavy Wireless as a show. We have Network Automation Nerds as a show. But we could have talked about those on heavy networking, right? So there's a couple of things here. One, there's no lack of content. There is no lack of topics to discuss. Heavy networking, which is the show name that evolved, that was the original Packet Pushers. That was the OG podcast on the network and how we started. We changed the name over time, so it became the weekly show, and then we named it Heavy Networking because as we added more shows to the lineup, it needed to stand out and be specific in some way. That show is a bit of a catch-all. We can cover any sort of networking technology that we want to. We can go way up the stack and talk about HTTP 3 and QUIC and TLS and have that kind of a conversation. Or we can go way down and talk about optical networking and DWDM. We can go all the way down there and everything in between. So what happens when there's a show like Heavy Wireless? Do we never talk about wireless anymore? Just because Keith Parsons is over there and he's like, this globally renowned expert on Wi-Fi stuff. So I don't dare talk about Wi-Fi anymore because Keith's over there with his own show on my network. Well, no, because Wi-Fi, even though Keith has got that show and covers all of those topics thoroughly, there's still room on heavy networking to talk at some point this year in 2024 about Wi-Fi 7 because it's coming to market and it's going to have a bearing on network architectures and people that are thinking about doing a network refresh on their Wi-Fi because maybe they're still on N or something. Maybe they're just, it's like, okay, so we really should update. And I'd like to have an overview of Wi-Fi 7 and figure out if that's what I should be waiting for all the Wi-Fi 7 APs to come out. We could run that show on heavy networking. Sure, it doesn't have to be on heavy wireless just because Keith has all those topics. Now, what they might get into on heavy wireless is they might get deep into radio theory. They might get deep into the nuances of how client authentication works. And maybe we're not doing that on heavy networking because we're going to do the broader shows, something like that. Security, the same thing. We have a show called Packet Protector. Okay, that's a security-focused show. Does that mean I can never talk about security topics again on heavy networking? Well, sure I can. I mean, yeah, we can have a firewall, kind of a show there if we want, or we can talk about cloud network security design if we want on heavy networking. There's room for all of that stuff. Again, there's no lack of content topics to talk about. There's different depths you can go into depending on your audience and what your focus is. There's different people that come up, and there's not room on every show for everybody. But if you have enough shows, you can kind of make room for everybody who's got a voice and something to share.
I really like the way you phrased that, having a broader category. And then if you want to go deeper, maybe you need to go over and listen to the wireless show to take a deeper dive on radio theory or one of those other topics. And I think this speaks to the idea of where we should place our effort. And I think it leads to the next question kind of logically. With all the shows, and there's room for broad and deep, how do you decide when it's time to end a show based on how successful it's been? Because I think this is very analogous to we as technologists, we put effort into skilling up in a particular area or working on this project for a long time. I think we could learn from you on how you decide to let something go or stop doing it and start putting that effort to good use in a different area.
Well, everything's got a life cycle. Technology has a life cycle. Podcasts have a life cycle. Our jobs and time with a company has a life cycle. There's a beginning and an end to it. And it's not bad that something ends. If its time has come, it's time to end it. That's fine. It's okay. Why might we end something? Well, in the case of like Datanauts, we were talking before the show when Datanauts came up. That's a show Chris Wall and I did for 3-4 years, something like that.
Favorite all time, up there with Geek Whisperers. Yeah.
Yeah, it started because he and I met each other at a conference. We immediately hit it off and were friendly and had a great conversation. And we're like, we got to do something together. And so Chris and I decided we wanted to do a podcast together, and it became Datanauts. And as Chris's career developed, I was doing podcasting. Eventually, as we were doing Datanauts, I ended up doing podcasting full time. Packet Pushers became my full-time profession. Chris was working at Rubrik, the backup data management, whatever they categorize themselves as company. He was employee, 32 or something. It was very early, and he was there riding the Rubrik wave until they blew up into a huge number of employees. And that job was very demanding for him and challenging. And it kind of got to the point where Datanauts was too big a rock to push uphill for us because the demands on his time because of what his day job was just too much. And so we slowed the cadence down a bit. We tried to do every other week. And even that wasn't, went from a weekly to every other week. And even that was just couldn't keep it going. Sometimes the hill's too steep or the rock's too heavy to keep pushing it. And we decided, you know what, let's end it. It's time. We had a ton of great conversations during that podcast because the whole idea was to bring technologists from two different areas of expertise. Chris was very strong in virtualization and kind of cloud technologies. He was getting into that world. I was strong with networking and security. And it's like, let's mash that up into a show and, see what kind of conversations we can have. We had some great conversations. We had some great episodes, but it came to a natural end. Couldn't keep driving it. And so we called it. That's just the way it is. Podcasting is not something you have to do for the rest of your life. Just because you start something, it's not like, will the world continue if I stop producing this show? Absolutely, it will continue because there's so many other podcasts and things for people to listen to out there. And so you got to call it. We try, now that said, we do try to create shows that have legs, that are going to have longevity. You want something that's got some years in it. You want to be able to build an audience. You want to be able to cover a lot of topics with a lot of depth, and that takes time. Something coming in the future from Packet Pushers that we're experimenting with, we're talking to a few people now about creating limited series where it isn't designed to be a podcast that runs forever. It's going to be 20 episodes on a specific topic, and it's got a story arc. It's going to take you to build a thing from the beginning to the end over those 20 episodes. You're going to learn how to do X, whatever X technology is. We're having a few conversations with people about creating a limited series like that. And we think that's another thing. It's kind of the same idea. It's got a life cycle, but we know from the beginning what that life cycle is going to be. It's more like delivering a course, let's say, but in podcast format. So that's a different way that we're going. We think that gets away from the challenge of, I'm going to create this podcast and now I'm married to it for the rest of my life. I have to put something out the door, once a week or twice a month or whatever it is, because that's really hard too.
It becomes part of your identity almost when you worked on it for a long time. I feel like there's this grieving period, whether it's a podcast, whether it's a blog that someone kept going for a long time, or they put a ton of time into learning this new thing, or they worked on this technology at work and suddenly the direction shifted.
Yeah. I mean, that's happened to all of us. I spent 20 odd years building out data center networks and, big campus LANs and global WANs in a few places. And as I went from job to job, I lost various things I wasn't working. Oh, the new job, I don't get to work with F5s anymore. And I was working with F5s so much and it was part of my identity. And I was really good with those boxes and the next job didn't have them. Or if you want to go way back in time, I think Cisco made a box called the AS5301. It was a router that you stuck ISDN lines in and people could dial into this thing. It was basically a giant modem, but it was a bank of modems stuffed into a router and you could get people on the network back when dial-up was a thing. That was a piece of technology I had to dive into and really understand. And eventually it became obviated because you could get broadband almost anywhere and everywhere. It wasn't like it was, of course you had broadband at your house. Everybody has broadband at their house. That's the way that works anymore. Even if it's DSL, you've got something. You don't need to dial up anymore. And eventually AS5301s they weren't ISDN lines, they were T1 lines. Why do we need this anymore? We don't. And you shut it down and you're a little sad because, I was really good at that. Lifecycle again.
It's interesting that you referenced this idea of, limited run series. As content producers, we seem to be taking inspiration from other content. And you see these limited run television shows or, a mini series, even if it's just a 1 or 2 parter, sometimes it's interesting enough to bring to people's attention. And really it is just that slight, small chunk of content and then you let it go. And then I guess in that context, you really have a platform to inform people about those limited run series. You maybe create some headers or tails.
Oh yeah.
Talking, about these limited run series on the rest of the network. And you can kind of push that a little bit better. Not a question, just an observation.
Yeah, there's lots of ways we can amplify that series like that exist. I mean, we'd publish them as part of our normal catalog. We've got, we push them out into the universe via Apple Podcasts and other podcast subscription services. And then we can, of course, use the network to let people know that they exist. Yeah, drop an ad in the middle of a podcast. Hey, do you like this show? You might like this limited run series we did. Go over here and listen to it. And, go find it in your podcatcher. Here it is. And download all 20 episodes and off you go. We also got newsletters and the website and so on. So yeah, it is easy for us to let people know we created this thing. It exists now and you can go get it if you want it.
I imagine that with the different styles of shows, right? If you do end up doing the limited run series, you'll probably learn some lessons from doing that a few times that can then make the other shows better. That's my theory.
Well, there's room in the larger podcasts, the ones that run as weeklies or twice a month, whatever, to do limited run series of some kind. We've had multi-part conversations over time. So one of the lessons I've learned over time is most people don't really want a 2.5 hour, 3 hour monster podcast on a tech topic. They just like, can you break it down in chunks, man? I got a life to live here. I can't handle that much content in one thing. So I've recorded some monster shows about network automation, and I did a show on TLS 1.3 with an instructor, Ed Harmouche, who had gone super deep on the topic and had a lot to share. And we talked for over 2 hours, both of those shows. It's like, those should have been multi-part shows. In a sense, that's a limited run series. I think there's room for that. And yeah, I'm kind of excited to see when we do these limited run series, assuming they come to life. They're just ideas right now, but assuming they do come to life, what we do learn. Because you're exactly right. We don't know what we don't know yet doing something like this. And I think we're going to figure out some new things.
Well, I think we just wanted to take this opportunity to announce the Generative AI Nerd Journey, the twice monthly podcast that we're launching just as soon as we decide whether or not to do it. It's the next technology wave. We missed out on having a cloud podcast. So
if you train the LLMs on your own voices, then you won't even have to do the podcast technically. Just let the LLM generate it. Now off you go.
It's maybe a dirty little secret that we run our own Gen AI Data Nuts podcast. It's a private feed. We've had enough audio of you guys to clone it, and then we have a large language model that writes a script, and including some disagreements. It's interesting.
What's funny is all this technology exists. That's the scary part. Someone could actually do that if they had enough access to learning hardware.
Which is why we need this podcast.
Here's a fun question for you, Ethan. What is your favorite all-time packet pusher show? And why? I'd love to hear the answer.
Yeah, I'd love to hear the answer too. Because, dude, I've recorded probably a couple thousand podcasts at this point. I was thinking about this. That's my guess. I don't have any one favorite episode we recorded. Like, there was that one time. No, but I do have a favorite type of show, I guess. The type of show that I personally like to record, because I come from a heavy engineering background, is I love the shows that go deep. I love those kind of shows where you can sit with a guest or a group of guests that know really a lot about one specific topic and just go right into it. Talk about how the technology really works, but do it in a practical way. When you're studying for certifications, you a lot of times get mired down in the bits and bytes and the headers and how this policy behaves, or the different options you have when you're configuring X or whatever it is. And you get lost in all these details and you forget the why, the context of it all. What's the point of all of this? So a conversation where you can get into the why of it all and then go deep on what's actually happening under the hood that's making it all happen and fulfilling that why, giving you the answers to that, how you're actually going to get it done. Are my favorite sorts of shows. And not every show that I record is like that. It all depends on what the topic is. Some things are a survey, kind of a high level about a new tech. Some things are more of a grab bag, a roundtable discussion about a variety of different shows. And those are fun and those have their place. Some shows we do are career shows, and people love to hear about career and career opportunity shows and how to think about that and so on. But the nerdy tech shows where we get just
whoa. You're on our turf now. Let's say
You know what I'm saying? Those the really hardcore nerdy engineering stuff is where I'm happiest, and I love producing shows like that because people use them as references. They'll use them as like a course material or supplemental course material. They want to learn about a thing, and then there were 3 or 4 nerds on a Packet Pushers episode talking about that thing, and they listen to it and they learn a lot and they get perspective and things to think about. And so-and-so mentioned this, that when they turn this feature on, it did this, and that's a thing I got to watch out for when I turn it on in my environment. That's something you don't learn in the manual. Those shows are great.
Speaking of going deep and things you don't learn in a manual is what to do if you're laid off. A lot of people in our industry have been hit with this in the last few years. And I'm just curious, Ethan, with what you've learned by setting up the Packet Pushers job board and maybe speaking with anyone out there in the industry who's been laid off in some way, can you share some of the genesis behind that and some of the learnings that would help the individual who's just found out, hey, your job's coming to an end and you need to do something next?
So to back up a second, yeah, Packet Pushers has a job board, jobs.packetpushers.net. We started that beginning of 2024. We launched that in January, and it was really an evolution of what we had been doing before with our Slack group. We have a community Slack. You can find that at packetpushers.net/community. And join that Slack group if you wanted to. But one of the channels in that Slack group was #jobs. And the point of the jobs channel was, are you looking for something? Let people know you're out there and what your skills are. Do you have a position you're trying to fill and you're struggling to find somebody? Post your job in here. Just go for it. Community, exchange information, try to find each other. Networking, which is what Packet Pushers focus on, even though we talk about other tech too, cloud and security and whatever else. But networking has been the focus. Network engineers are harder and harder to find, it feels like, especially people with senior experience. There's some number of graybeards that are aging out. There are fewer people that are entering at the junior level, and coming into networking. And the technology is increasingly complex. The networking stack is more and more complicated. So finding people to do these jobs is hard. It's hard for everybody. It's hard for companies that are trying to fill those spots. And it can also be tricky if you're an engineer that's been laid off to find a spot now, because it's a big world out there. Where are you going to work? Is the opportunity fully remote? Or is it a hybrid? Or do I have to be in the office? And every company's got different policies, and those policies seem to be changing depending on how much commercial real estate is at stake in a given situation. So the jobs board was just an evolution of all of that. The idea is, let's give the community a place to find people with very particular skills, because that's the thing. If you're a network engineer, if you're a cybersecurity professional, you're a cloud guru, you got a very particular set of skills. How do you find a job that's looking for your skills? If you're looking for those people, do you just go to Recruiter and hope? Do you scrape LinkedIn and try to find, do you go to Indeed or some of these bigger job boards where it's more about statistics and numbers, and you end up with 100 resumes, 3 of which are kind of interesting, but maybe not exactly what you want? Or do you talk to the community that's doing this stuff for a living and has those skills? And when you have all the acronyms listed in your job requirements, they go, I know exactly what you're talking about. I have 80% of those skills and 20%, I know what the acronyms are and I could figure them out pretty quick. Let's talk. Yeah, let's talk and have that conversation. So the jobs board is free for anybody that wants to apply for a job, someone who's looking for work. If you want to list it, I don't know what the pricing is because I'm not the guy that sets the pricing on things, but it's low cost to list your job up there. And the idea is to grow it into a resource that helps people with very specific needs find people with those very specific skills.
I really like that discussion of Lifecycle, the life cycle of a podcast. And Ethan even gave the example of the Datanauts podcast, one of my favorite all-time podcasts. And I just want to say thank you, Chris and Ethan, for doing that podcast because it was very impactful to me and my career during the time that it ran. I listened to it so many times, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do it. Ethan emphasized the fact that just because something reaches the end of its life cycle, it doesn't mean it's the end of the world. There are other things that we can work on, other things we can put our time and effort into. It could be an opportunity for you to do something completely different or work on an idea that you had been putting off or just never had time to do. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing for something to come to an end. The idea of the life cycle of something being unknown when we start is a little bit scary, but it's true. It's a very profound statement. We can build a podcast or whatever it is for longevity, but we really don't know when something will come up that might keep us from doing that, might keep us from blogging, might keep us from continuing at this company where we're working today, might keep us from continuing to study toward this certification. But I would say, due to the fact that we don't know the life cycle or longevity of a specific job we have when we start it, that's the reason we consistently encourage listeners like you to document your work. Document the things you're working on, your achievements. Make sure you're updating LinkedIn, your resume, and other things so that you have all that information and build a body of work, something that's publicly accessible that other people can look at to see what you can do. Ethan mentioned that his favorite type of podcast, or as we say, show, is the kind where we go deep into the technology. He's definitely right about shows like Packet Pushers delivers being referenceable pieces of content, things that people can listen to and learn from. We talk a lot on the show about being a top-tier individual contributor and what our guests have done to stand out. Well, honestly, one way to stand out is to have some awareness of the industry you're in outside of your bubble. So you could be listening to podcasts that dive deep or just give you a broad exposure to a new area or an area that you're interested in. Maybe it's reading blogs or watching videos, something that you've researched on your own time. You never know when the exposure to that type of information can provide the answer to a question at the office and really make you stand out amongst your peers. That's one way you can take action or take control of becoming a top-tier individual contributor. That's educating yourself. And it doesn't have to be a lot of time. You can listen to a podcast on a walk in the car. You can read a blog for 5 minutes every now and then, watch a video. You can join a technical community. We've talked about how important that is and how that led to some of our previous guests standing out. That community can be in an online forum of some sort, whether it's the Spiceworks community, some mixture of Reddit forums. It could be in-person meetup groups. It could be people you work with or just meet in the industry. But this talking to other people, learning from them, that's another way to get an idea of what they're working on, the problems they're solving, and it helps you learn. And interestingly enough, this actually goes back to Lifecycle as well, because we can be parts of multiple communities, and there is a life cycle for each community in our lives. When our job changes, we might choose to no longer participate in a community. Or when we gain some expertise, we might go from the person who is asking questions of our community of people, whether online or in person, for information, to someone who is more of a contributor. Or as I said before, it may just not be as valuable for us to be part of that community because something in our lives changed. Just like Ethan said, everything has a life cycle, and you never know where it might take you. Next week, we'll talk more about the Packet Pushers job board and some of the trends Ethan is seeing in terms of skill gaps in the industry. I hope you'll definitely check that one out, bookmark it, and be a participant if you see a job that's of interest to you on the Packet Pushers job board. We'll make sure links are in the show notes, and we'll catch you next week.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.